In the Eastern Empire, there were two figures that were always dominant, the emperor and the patriarch. The emperor was responsible for the political life of the realm. The emperor had religious as well as civic responsibilities. I found it interesting that Justinian, one of the early emperors, it was his task on Easter Sunday to carry the offerings up through the people, joining the priests through the lovely gate that enters into the holiest of holies. He did that as a religious act, as the emperor of the whole Byzantine empire. So a fascinating role in which the emperor played. The patriarch was often chosen from well-educated civil servants. They were always well-educated people. The Pope did not have and never has had authority over the Eastern Church. Now, the Pope may not agree to that statement, but factually that's true. The Pope has never had authority over the Eastern Church. That has been done by the Patriarch. Now today you have the Greek Orthodox, you have different countries have their Orthodox churches, but the Constantinople Patriarch has still had supremacy. Bishops, from the 6th century on, they were required to be celibate, and they normally came from the ranks of monks. And monasteries are very, very important in the Eastern Church. They're important in the Western Church too. We have the Jesuits and the Benedictines and the Franciscans, but they're especially important to the Eastern Church. And then parish priests. I put up a picture here of Father Vasily. This is a priest that Ann and I met in 1988 in a little rural parish north of Odessa. He kind of shared some of his story. He was a very simple man. I think he had virtually no theological education. He said one day the bishop spoke to him and said, I think we would like you to be the priest of the parish. And he was a married man, which most of the priests in the Orthodox Church, the parish priests, are married, have a family, have their regular work and responsibilities. But he hosted us at just a marvelous time within his parish. He spoke about the tragedy, the day that the German armies retreated from where they had been as they pulled back, and it was just a slaughter within the village, he said, also within their parish. But you find, I suspect, then that the priests, while they're married and they have vocations that they carry on, many may be farmers, they have an identity with the people of the parish that's quite unique and quite different from what happened in the Western Church, where from quite an early time, both bishops and priests were celibate in the Roman Church. Education. In the Western Church, partly because of all of the barbarians to the north, when the barbarian invasions happened, the education that survived usually was for the priests and the clergy and by the clergy. That was not true in the East. The East had a much stronger educational component, so that the laity of the Church of the East have always tended to be rather highly involved in the life of their church. They've not been a passive element. Monasteries. You find them everywhere in the Christian East. They were sort of formed a defense around the parishes and the people. They were seen as a first line of defense. They were in the cities. They said Constantinople at one time had 300 monasteries in the city. They were also in remote settings. Most Orthodox monks were and are today lay people, laymen who have a secular job. And it's also true that there was ample places for female religious to conform to that type of religious life as well. The tasks of the monks in the East has been charitable work, hospitality, care for the sick, and provider of alms for the poor. They are viewed as the givers, not the beggars. And sometimes I think I've misunderstood that as I've looked at Western monks that often as out begging for the life of the church. In the East, they're viewed as those who give, who share with those who are in need. But the primary purpose of monks was to pray and to live a holy life, to guard the sacredness of God. And so mysticism, which we want to talk about in a moment, that mystical life, the life of silence in worship, the life of sheer mystery, is terribly important to Orthodox people. So a bit about worship and mysticism. When Ann and I were there worshiping in their churches, there's no organs, there's no brass choirs that play, it's the human voice. And it's done usually with basso profundo voices that are just gorgeous, and choirs that fill the space with this gorgeous sound. The holiness with which they receive the sacrament is a very precious thing. I remember a bit to my embarrassment when we were in Leningrad worshiping, and the crowds were immense within the churches we were at. They stand, you don't sit. And the liturgies go 3 hours, though we never endured the 3-hour length of time. But I remember I was standing, and directly in front of me was a woman holding a little child. And I suppose I offered a little smile, a little nod, a little recognition to the child. The mother picked up on that and turned around and put her hand up like, "Don't bother this child. This child is at worship." And there is a sense of an awe and mystery that's pretty exciting with Orthodox worship. I had a quote that I lifted out of a book that I've enjoyed reading the last year, and it says, "Orthodox Christianity prides itself on its faithfulness to tradition, its majestic round of worship, woven into a texture of ancient music, sustained with carefully considered gesture and choreography, amid a setting of painting, following prescribed artistic convention. It can all be seen as reflecting the timelessness of heaven." We have all of those components in there that are so important. I recall when I was doing some sharing with Father Quasimodes, and we would talk about different branches of the church, and I remember clearly that he really, his sensitivities were sharp when he talked about Roman Catholics. There was not a comfortableness that was there. So there is a tension that goes back in the life of the church that was really reflected today. Paul?
I just dovetail on something you said. If anyone wants to ever experience a taste of the earliest liturgy of the church, going back to about the 2nd century, go to the Orthodox Church in town. The liturgy in the Orthodox tradition is the earliest liturgy of the Christian church. And it's still there.
John Chrysostom and Cyril, those two liturgies are back to certainly the 3rd, 4th centuries. And it is a precious thing to experience in the life. I thought when I first kind of was talking with Pastor Byrne about doing a class of building on at the end a visit over there to the church. I didn't pull that off, but if we really decide sometime that might be something a lot of you would do, I'd certainly work on seeing if we can do that. Ellen?
We take the kids who are doing God in church over there. It's fascinating for a worship service.
Oh, so you do take part in a service. Very good. Excellent. Yes, David?
When I was teaching in Sunday school a comparative religion, we did visit the Orthodox Church with their permission, and it was very interesting. It was all in Greek, so the kids could understand what was going on, but they couldn't understand the words. And then Harry Vikas was superintendent of schools at that time, and he was a member of that church, so he came and explained things to the kids, after the service. It's really impressive.
Yes. I've forgotten that. He was superintendent for a long time here, yes, and he was very active. Number of lay people that I know we met through Mayo Clinic and so forth are really very active in the life of grace. I was so surprised when I did, I just clicked on the Google, their parish here in town, and I assumed that this Father Quasimodes was still here, but I see they have a new priest, and it sounds like that's been a new transition in town, so I don't know the name of the current priest. But at least this life that the Orthodox put together has sustained the dynamic of that church for all of these centuries, even in the face of Islam constantly at the door, and constantly not just knocking but threatening. They've somehow maintained a vitality in the life of worship that's exciting. And we need